Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Before I get started, I'm just going to say today I'm going to be talking about some topics involving death. Most of this is technical, as most of my videos are, but if you don't want to hear about things adjacent to the topic of death, feel free to give this a skip. But otherwise, I'm going to jump right into it. And I'm going to start by sharing a couple of stories from my life that have actually happened. One of which, I'll start with a story of a friend of mine who had a tooth infection. Unfortunately, it spread to his heart, and eventually he died of sepsis. Very untimely, very sad for everybody. But one of the things that stuck with me was the experience of being in the hospital. The machines, I don't remember, the machines that were the life support that was keeping his body present, were either unplugged or were just about to be unplugged. And what I recall from it was the fact that nobody knew of a next of kin at all. Because I'm on the West Coast, he was here on the West Coast, but from all we knew was that he had moved out to literally the opposite end of the country from where he started, which was on the East Coast. And for that reason, nobody knew his family. Nobody knew who to get in touch with anything. We knew about him, but we didn't know any of the things that would be necessary to make arrangements after a passing. So the picture that stuck with me was, his roommate, holding his phone and, lifting this lifeless hand to try and get it to unlock the fingerprint scanner, because of course nobody knew the passcode to his phone. And we were trying to figure out if there were any contact details, anything that might point to a next of kin. We did get the phone unlocked before we left that room for the final time, so that was good, but it's also a little macabre in my mind. Is here's just using a finger to try and unlock a phone because it's the only thing you have that might actually lead you to a next of kin. So that is something that I have witnessed. I have been in the room for that. Other things that I have experienced includes, a friend of a friend, a parent passed, and they're like, okay, well, can we get access to their computer? Because, there's records there. The parent helpfully said, everything you need to know is on the computer. Okay, but how do you get access to that without a password? And in my head, one of the things that I had to take into account was, okay, well, also modern versions of Windows tend to encrypt the hard drive by default. Because for an admin like me, changing a password while the computer is offline is trivial stuff. You can just go in as if there's no password whatsoever. If the drive is encrypted, that becomes impossible. Specifically for that reason. Yes, you can say, oh, well, anybody who knows can get around the password. Yeah, that's the problem. Bad people also know how to get around the password. So Microsoft, in recent versions of Windows, has made that a default to encrypt the drive, usually by using the TPM only, which is the chip that is in the computer, so that if you take the hard drive out, it doesn't have the encryption key anymore. You can't unlock the drive. Or I've also seen if you're booting from a different operating system, then the TPM won't unseal the key because it doesn't meet the parameters that it was sealed with. This is all acting exactly as it is supposed to. But then if you don't have the recovery key, which is saved to the person's Microsoft account, then what do? You can't access that anymore. So it's all very well and good that they say everything you need to know is on the computer. But unless you have that 48-character recovery key, you can't actually access the computer. You can say, well, I mean, if you got onto the computer, you would be able to log into my Microsoft account because I've had a text file with the passwords there. Yes, but in order to get the recovery key, you need to log into your Microsoft account first. We've got a bit of a chicken and the egg problem going here. So there are quite a few situations where, because here's the other thing, is that person may not even have known that the hard drive was encrypted because Microsoft is doing this by default. So they thought that the computer could just be an open door, and it wasn't. There's a lot of situations like this where either something unexpected happens and you don't get a chance to pass on a password, or something has transparently happened behind the scenes for security. Nobody's doing this to make the process of handling a passing more difficult, but it's happened for security. And if that has taken place, you may not be necessarily aware of everything without a list of passwords that you can use to get around it. So, okay, what do? We've been trained to not share passwords with people, right? We've all been trained that you don't write it down. You don't put it in under your pillow or something like that, because it's not supposed to be written down. It's not supposed to be shared with people. So what do? And there's another thing to think of, which is, I've had conversations with friends of mine who have said, hey, if something happens to me and I'm not here anymore, I want you to just erase my computer. Just erase the whole thing without looking at it. Promise me that you'll just erase the whole thing without looking at it. Okay, but what if there's something there that's necessary? I mean, technically, yes, it's your life. If you don't want to notify next of kin that you're gone, okay, that's definitely your choice. But absent expressly saying that, people are going to want to get in touch with your next of kin. People are going to want to not necessarily pry into your former life, but there might be reasons why access is necessary. And I've taken the opposite tack of that. I says, if something happens to me and I'm no longer here, go look through everything. Go look through everything you want, because I'm not going to be here anymore. It won't matter to me. That's not an approach that necessarily everybody's happy to take. I get that. But I also said, because the reason that I'm so open about it is because anything that really, really, really I wanted to make sure does not pass on to anybody else is encrypted. It's encrypted separately. So yes, by all means, look at all the stuff that is on my computer, who I've talked to. You'll be able to find next of kin that way. You'll be able to find my friends so that you can tell them, yeah, it's not that he's just dumped you or ghosted you or anything like that. Something happened. Sad as that is another valid use for that. And anything that I really, 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 really wanted to keep private won't be accessible. That's just the way it is. But There are also things like, okay, what about the stuff that is encrypted for a very good reason, like a password database? Or another area where I often see this is in cryptocurrency. While I do not do anything substantial in cryptocurrency at all for a variety of reasons, I know some of the technical underpinnings behind some more advanced scenarios. Things like, okay, if the CEO of a company is assumed to have passed because nobody can find them and nobody can talk to them, okay, well, what happened to the private keys? There have been instances in the news where, okay, well, we can't access any of the wallets. We can't access any of the offline storage. We can't do any of that because the only person who had knowledge of those keys was the person who's no longer with us. So how do we find a way of allowing this information in general to persist in a way that is both secure and yet possible to access once the person with the primary knowledge is gone? There's some interesting ways of doing that, and that's the technical part that I'm going to talk about. If you've worked in cryptography, asymmetric cryptography, for any amount of time whatsoever, you will have come across RSA keys. RSA is derived from the initials of the last names of the people who invented it, Rivest, Shamir, and Adelman. They all went on to do other things as well. Rivest also, for example, Ron Rivest had a hand in RC4, the Rivest cipher number 4, and has had involvement in more cryptographic standards since that time. Another one of those is Shamir. And Shamir is what I'm going to talk about here because Shamir had an interesting thing as well, separately, which was Shamir's secret sharing scheme. And that is a tongue twister. I dare you, say Shamir secret sharing scheme clearly 5 times in a row at speed. Have fun. But the essence of the secret sharing scheme, which is not something that I find a lot of people know about, and yes, there are other ways of doing secret splitting, which is the catch-all name for this particular field. There's other ways of doing it, but Shamir's secret sharing scheme is one of them, and it's the one that I tend to remember first because it's 4 S's in a row, and I don't have to remember anything complicated for that. But essentially, what this is, if you think of taking a password, say password, just the word, if you split that up, let's say into 4 pieces. Okay, so somebody gets a PA, somebody gets an SS, somebody gets an WO, and somebody gets an RD. Okay, well, nobody has the full password. But every time, if somebody steals a piece, now they know 2 characters out of the 8, and they only have to guess 6. If somebody steals 2 pieces, they have 4 characters, now they only have to guess 4. So in this sense, every time you get a part of the secret, you're actually revealing part of the secret. Secret sharing schemes or secret splitting schemes have a really, really, really interesting mathematical property. And I'm not here to explain the math genuinely. But the property is you can set it up in such a way that, number one, you determine how many shares there are. And number 2, you determine how many shares are required before you can reconstitute the actual secret that's being shared. And until you have that threshold number, it's gibberish. It doesn't matter how many shares you have. If you have less than the threshold, all you can get is gibberish. But as soon as you have the threshold, you can reconstitute the actual secret. This has a few really useful properties, such as somebody lost their share, there was a fire, something burned down, who knows? But you don't need all of the shares unless you specify that the threshold is all of them. But if you're doing a partial, say you have 8 shares, you need 5. Okay, well, you can lose 3. You can lose control of 3. And the remainder will all be able to reconstitute the secret, no matter which ones they are. Any 5 will be able to unlock the full secret. So you can lose any 3. That's useful. But because you need 5, that means that you can also lose 4 without compromising the actual secret. No, the remaining 4 won't be able to reconstitute the secret, so you'd better regenerate your secret sharing scheme and possibly choose other people to hold those shares. But even losing track of up to that number will not blow the secret, will not reveal the secret. So it's a really interesting thing. There are some cryptocurrency wallets out there that do offer secret sharing. They usually recommend against it because it's not for the faint of heart and it requires a lot of planning. As an example, I did this once just for the thought exercise of how you would do it. And you go, okay, well, let's start by saying I'll give it to these people that I trust, friends and family. Okay. Well, but they all live in the same geographic region as I do. If a massive earthquake hits, then that probably renders a lot of physical storage unreachable and might kill a few of the people who had the secret shares at the same time. So you want to choose people that are close to you that are not necessarily nearby. Nearby is convenient because, you know what, if there's an untimely passing, if I get hit by a truck, then the people who are right here can reconstitute it fine. But if there's a natural disaster and I still want some of that to be accessible, say from a cloud backup, then I also need to choose people who are not in this geographic vicinity. You might, depending on your situation, also need to take into account geopolitical conflict, is how I'm going to phrase that. That's not something that we necessarily needed to think about in the past, and it is something that we need to take into account now. We had to take it into account in sometimes in the past too, but regardless. So figuring out who's going to hold those shares is part of what you need to think about. You also need to think about how many shares are you going to create in total and what's your threshold. Because if you have 20 shares and you require 12 of them in order to reconstitute the secret, okay, but that means you need to have 12 people who know how to get in touch with each other. And that is also, and they need to know that they do need to get in touch with each other in order to verify, yes, this person has passed on. We need to, bring our shares together in order to get access to the password database. That could be significant. Conversely, if you say, okay, I'm going to create 20 shares, but we only need 5. Okay, That's certainly more secure in the sense it's more resilient, not secure. It's more resilient because, okay, you can lose a full 3/4 of the shares that are out there. But is it terribly secure? Because any 5 of those will now reveal the secret. So you need to try and find a balance point between requiring too many shares to meet the threshold versus requiring too few. And either, if you're of the paranoid type, 3 people could conspire against you and reveal all your secrets before it's necessary. Or if that number is lost and somebody were to get a hold of it, they can attack you by reconstituting the secret. So it's one of those things where it's very specific to your individual situation and what you're comfortable with. In a business context, you might have something like, okay, we're specifically putting 1 share with our lawyers, and let's say I'm the CEO. 1 share goes to the chief operating officer, 1 goes to the chief information officer, 1 goes to the lawyers. And a 4th one, let's say, goes with the chief security officer. So chief operating officer, chief information officer, chief security officer, and the lawyers. Okay. And I'm going to say that you need 3. You need 3 shares. That means that the 3 officers, the 3 chief officers that I've identified at the organization, can come together in agreement. If there's a disagreement among them for any reason, then the lawyers have a share and can say, we're going to go and make the determination on whether we contribute our secret to the other 2 in order to unlock whatever we're protecting here. Or they can make the call to say, no, we don't feel that the conditions for doing this have been met, so we're going to withhold our share. In a business context, you can lay that out and say who has the decision and how many of these people need to come together in order to make that decision. And you can involve outside parties as necessary. On a personal level, that's sometimes a little more difficult, because then you also have, okay, well, how do you store these secrets, these split secrets, these shares that are supposed to be able to be brought back together again? Do you write it on paper? Paper's awfully flimsy if there's a fire or a flood or something like that. And where do these people put it? Do they have a safe deposit box where they can put it? Do they have some sort of storage where they put things that they want to keep safe? For when I was doing it as an experiment, I went full bore. I got like these metal capsules with not engraved, but letters that were stamped into metal pieces, and string them together, and you can seal them into this metal capsule, and that'll survive fire, flood, and you can put it in a safe deposit box or wherever valuables are kept. But not everybody did that. Not everybody knows where they are. So you also need to check in over time, as I have found, 10 years down the road. Hey, do you still have that thing I gave you? Is it still safe? Can you verify that? And people go, oh, I thought it was over here, but I can't find it now. Okay, that's one that's lost. Have you lost more than your critical number? Are you getting close to having the critical number lost, where the secret would no longer be able to be reconstituted? Maybe it's time to regenerate the shares and send those out again. It's not really fun having to think about death and having to think about how people will be able to continue or do what they feel they need to if you're no longer there. But it is important to do so because nobody expected my friend to end up with a tooth infection that caused sepsis and led to his passing. Nobody expects to go out and be involved in a traffic accident. Nobody expects these sorts of things. Nobody expects an earthquake. Nobody expects a flood. Nobody expects a massive fire. So planning for these things in advance is kind of important. And hey, if you have explicit instructions to people saying, I don't want you to contact any family, I want you to erase my computer without looking at anything, and I'm going to make sure that the people who are closest to me both know all of this, and I have explicit instructions to that effect with my will at the lawyer's or, in a safe deposit box somewhere else. Okay. That's all something that you can do too, if that's what you want. But for a lot of things, like password databases, that might be really helpful so that the people who are still here can take care of closing things down and winding things up in a controlled way, rather than just there being a bunch of threads left hanging forever. So, yeah, a little bit more of a somber topic, but the technical topic of secret sharing schemes is a fascinating one to me. It's, even if you abstract over the mathematical complexity, the social complexity of figuring out how many shares there are, who holds them, and how do we verify that they can actually maintain access to them over time, is a fascinating question, at least for me. And I've spent probably a lot more time on it than was really necessary, but it was useful as a thought experiment. Hopefully the thought experiment might be useful for you too. Hopefully this discussion has been somewhat useful as well. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to hear me talk about, or thoughts on things that you would like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door NetAdmin, and we will see you next time.